Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside the Lines, show where we talk about humans and human beings and all the things that define us or the things that we think define us. And on today's program, we're going to talk about stereotypes. So, what is a stereotype? Well, a stereotype is a literary device. It's a characterization based on predefined terms. So, what does all that mean? Well, for example, probably one of the most common stereotypes is that of the dumb blonde. We've all seen it. We've seen it in TV shows. We see it in movies. You know that young girl who's blonde hair with blonde hair who is a little dim, a little flighty, a little silly, you know, not particularly smart by by any standard. So that's a stereotype, and basically it's a quick and easy way of creating a character by giving them, uh, like I said, certain uh, defining characteristics to create this characterization. Um, but how do we get stereotypes? Well, usually it begins with one impression, and as I said before, we've seen it 100 times, or more than that, really, until it becomes internalized, until we start associating blonde with dumb, or whatever other stereotypes there are out there, and which is an easy way for a writer, for example, to create a character, but it does create it can sometimes create a negative impression if we start thinking of real people in terms of stereotypes. If we encounter someone who is, again, blonde, for example, not to pick on blondes, but we start thinking of them, oh, well, she must be dumb, because that's what we've been told. So today we're going to talk a little bit about stereotypes, how we can get past them, and to start seeing real people or the real person. And for that, we have a special guest today on the show. Her name is Simone. And when I started talking to her about maybe coming on this program, my intention originally was to have her come on and talk about race. And we kind of wanted to do a part two to the episode that we had done earlier with Julian Miller, who is an African American male and who is a motivational speaker. Um, and I wanted to get her perspective as an young African American female and an athlete. But then she said something, as we were talking about this, she said something very interesting. She said, you know, I'm much more than that. I'm much more than just those things. And when she said that, it really spun me around nearly 180 degrees. I started realizing, yeah, yes, of course. I was trying to pigeonhole her into a particular box, into something that what I perceived her to be. These four things: this just young and African American and female and an athlete. But she is more than just those things. So, to help me talk about stereotypes and things like that, let me bring up my co host, who is more than just Queen of Hair Hats, Miss Renée Yaworsky.
Hello, and I had to choose the blonde one today.
Well, of course,
Of course, I had
but
to choose the blonde one.
but you're far from dumb. So
Thank
so
you.
see, you're the you're you're that exception. Well, no, I shouldn't say an exception because I've
We're gonna get a
yeah,
lot
I'm
of
just
hate mail from blonde women, and let me just say this right here. I'm not a natural blonde. I'm a natural brunette, and actually, I have noticed that when I started messing around because of acting and modeling and stuff, I started messing around with my appearance. I am treated very much differently when I'm out and about. It's like what you wear or what you present yourself as, even if I'm wearing glasses versus without glasses, makeup, not makeup, people treat you differently and they immediately come to some kind of a conclusion, you know?
Right.
So like when I'm in law school, I'm wearing suits, I'm brunette, I'm very matter of fact, I'm just getting, you know, I'm usually rushing around, I'm kind of aloof even, maybe even a little rude to people if they're trying to stop me if I'm working on a case. And in that case, I'm treated with respect. If I'm going to be more like happy and I'm casual, I'm off the clock, so to speak, that's when it starts coming up where I can notice, particularly men, thinking, oh, okay, this woman is not someone I have to take seriously. Maybe she's more of like a party girl or something.
Right.
But we're going to get into this, and I want to talk to Simone about stuff like this too, because
Yeah.
women tend to be in a no-win situation, because if we are not keeping up with our appearances, and if we are not being intelligent and articulate and confident, and all of those things, educated, then we're treated one way. But then if you go too far and you're too desirable, or you look too good, or you're dressing too well, then people will say, oh, you know, and there's all of this body shaming that'll go on, or
Right.
people
Yeah.
will think, I mean, I'm not even going to dignify the words, but there's a lot of like insults that people will come up with, or they'll think that you live your life in a certain way that's not serious. Whereas
Yeah.
men, you know, it's a double standard. Men can have their shirt off and mow the lawn or whatever they want to do, and they're basically treated with respect. Just
Yeah.
compared to women is my understanding. But anyways, that's a lot to digest in 1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say also, just to add more fire to the to the fuel here, or more fuel to
Bring it
the
on.
fire, rather. Speaking of cliches, the phrase "blondes have more fun"
Mm,
is it's not as innocuous as people seem to think it is. You know,
right,
it doesn't just mean that they're out partying. It really means that blondes are more sexually promiscuous. So that's what
right.
that actually means.
Exactly.
And so, you know, and again, it's part of that stereotype. It's part of that idea that blondes, and we're not picking on blondes. Please don't misunderstand. We're not. I'm just using that as an example. I mean, I could have chosen something else. I could have said the dumb jock uh,
Right, yeah.
stereotype and so forth.
Or like the muscle man, like the guy in the gym who's always
Or the
lifting. Like
guy,
I
or
go,
right,
like yeah, like I go to the gym and there's always like these guys lifting. And if you have if you communicate with them, it's not like they're any more likely to be stupid. A lot of them are like, you know, doctors or lawyers or whatever,
right.
and they're just
People who
very
want to
into
be in
their
shape.
fitness.
Yeah,
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 they're into their fitness, and that's a beautiful thing.
exactly,
Athletes tend
exactly.
to be very intelligent, actually, on the average, because people who
Yeah,
tend to care about their bodies and tend to also study. And actually, if you when I want to study, I go to the gym, and there's all this research about how you retain information and you actually learn information much more quickly when you are being
right.
physically
Right, because you're
active.
releasing all those endorphins and serotonin and all that stuff into your mind.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's let that be a nice segue to introducing our very special guest today, Miss Simone Deloache.
Woohoo!
Hello, Simone.
Hello,
What's
Simone.
up?
What's up?
How are we
Uh,
today?
I want to do a shout out, and I want to say that as the director, I can see you backstage, Simone, when no one else can, and you were kind of jamming to the song
I
at the
lo-
beginning, and I want to tell you that that's Manny's song. Manny wrote and
What?
produced that. Yeah, he's a musician, so I want to give him
That's
that shout out.
amazing. Yes, I was
yeah.
grooving,
The
feeling the
bass
beat.
line, yeah, it's a very cool
Mhm.
bass line.
Very
Putting you on the
neat.
spot,
See,
Manny.
see, there's more to me than
There's
meets
much
the
more to you.
eye.
I didn't know that when I
Mm.
met you.
Yeah, yeah. So, Simone,
Mhm. Yes.
so you've heard what we've been saying about
Mhm.
stereotypes,
Mhm.
and you know, and then we kind of started talking about athletics as
Sure.
well, and that stereotype. So, how do you feel about that? How do you respond to that sort of idea of that jocks, that people in athletics aren't particularly smart, especially from the point of view of a female athlete, if
Here
I
we
may say
are.
that. Here we
Yes.
are. Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. I believe I've intentionally done things and said things and behaved a particular way to escape that particular stereotype, to help show that there is variance to what an athlete is and who an
Right.
athlete is. Not only was I intentional about, have I been intentional about it, but I also just naturally behave differently than what is seen, like you said, on TV and on media. Now, in the last decade or so, I would say last quarter century, we've changed. Media has changed how they have portrayed jocks and those who are athletes. So I do appreciate that, because we're not all treated equally. Like, we're not all the same. But for myself, I think I really try to break that barrier in how I carry myself, how I speak. I think sometimes people are like really surprised that I just sit up straight, and it's not because I was taught a way. It was just because this is how I stand and how I sit, just how I carry myself. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to hear when people come to me and expect something different. And then when I open my mouth, they're like, whoa, like that was not what I was anticipating in approaching you. So I still see it, but I do think that it has changed over time.
Yeah. So, so what sport exactly were you involved
Yes.
in?
I grew up a swimmer. I'm a fish out of water. I love swimming. Breaststroke and the 400 IM was my race. And so even in that spectrum, at that time there weren't a lot of Black and brown children who enjoyed swimming and did it competitively. So even there, I stood out, and I was an oddball, kind of in that atmosphere. And it wasn't until my freshman year of high school I really started to dive into literally basketball. And I had to make a choice that was really difficult for me, whether I wanted to continue to pursue swimming or basketball. Chose basketball, and so my two main sports have been swimming and basketball, but I enjoy all of the sports.
Okay. Well, there's, I almost hate to even mention this, but there is that stereotype that African Americans and Black people don't like to swim.
There's another
and
one.
and here you are.
Although there's an entire continent, I will tell you that there is an entire continent of Black people that has ocean around it and lakes, and it's weird that Americans came up with that stereotype. But yeah, that's an American stereotype. That's not a global stereotype.
There we go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So,
The same would be true, by the way. I did two sports too. I did equestrian.
Yes.
I did equestrian, and then I did tennis. And I had to give up tennis because my elbow always gets messed up. So I ended up investing more in horses. And there's not as many stereotypes around horses, I don't think, because you're there with the animal. And I think that is a little bit different. But when I was doing tennis, now I'm older than you are, so this would have been back in like the 90s. But in the 90s, there was still a lot of rampant sexism. My brother was 6.5 years older than I was, and he was very competitive in multiple sports, including basketball. And he and his friends really would always say to me, why are you even bothering to invest so much in athletics? You're a girl. You will never be able to compete the way that we can. And, so I spent a lot of time trying to impress like my brother and all of his athlete friends and go to the games. And that really was, so like fast forward a little bit and things are opening up. And now the generation even younger than you are. We have a host here at the network who's 15 named LR, and she is competitive in basketball. And she never had to even consider this. I mean, it's just, we see female athletes on screen. We're respecting them more. But there was a lot of female athletes that went beforehand that had to pave the way to get that respect. Whereas men, it was just handed to them,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's always that generation that has to sort of stand on the shoulders of giants of the previous generation, and have to kick that door down and say, hey, you know what? We're here. We're going to compete, same as you guys. And that's another question that I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask Simone, speaking of basketball players, do you feel that female basketball players get the same kind of respect that male?
No. You don't even have to finish that sentence. Absolutely not. No, not at all. On any level, not only professionally, but collegiately as well. And even how female student athletes are raised in this sphere of basketball, right? You start kind of early depending on your development. And, there's high school basketball, there's summer ball. No. So much so, Mr. Manny, that so I have 3 injuries due to my intensive playing, and ACLs, right? It's a ligament in the knee, and it is higher and more prevalent in women, and research has shown it's because of how we're trained. A lot of trainers, right? They go to school just to train athletes, and at the time there really was no variance in a female athlete and a male athlete, and so trainers were just training us like they would the men. Well, our bodies are different, and our bodies
Right.
take different types of heat, and I think respectfully, it's okay to acknowledge that. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people are thinking that we're on one side or the other, where no, we're all the same. We should all be treated equally. Yes, I agree. And however, we can be treated equally and have different ways of how we approach things. So no, it wasn't until recently, due to research that we're training student athletes, female student athletes in particular, differently, so that we can have an equal opportunity to extend our playing. A lot of girls, after they get majorly injured, they stop. It's hard to come back from.
Right.
Speaking of professionally, you think about the Megatron, if you will, of men's basketball, men's sport in general, as Miss Renée was talking about. They've never had to question whether or not they could or that they should. They just did it. And
Right.
so women, the speaking of media, the broadcasting and the exposure and the people who want to sponsor them and believe in them, we've had to fight. We're still fighting. It wasn't long ago that the U.S. women's soccer team, who outplayed and outwon, almost 3 times the men's, USA soccer team, was starting to put the tire to the pavement of like, we want to be acknowledged and we want to be paid for the things we do.
Yeah.
So no, the answer to your question, I'm sorry to cut you off, but the answer is
No.
no. Treated equally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because I was thinking, I'll free admit, I'm not a sports guy. I don't really follow any professional or collegiate sports.
Mm-hmm.
But even I can name, 3 or 4 or 5 different male basketball players. I couldn't name you one female basketball player that's on that same level.
Oh.
And I think that speaks to the prejudice really against women's sports and against basketball players in particular, but I think across the board. So that said, who do you see as the sort of female Michael Jordan or Shaq or
Wow.
who sticks out in your mind in that
Oh
sport?
my gosh. In the sport. Well, forgive me. I myself have lost touch of the art and keeping up with recent. But when you said who sticks out, when you said Michael Jordan, I thought of Serena Williams immediately. I mean, the greatest of all time, regardless of the sport, regardless of the generation. I mean, what she has brought to the world of sport, not only in female sport, but in the life of tennis. My dad has adopted the Williams sisters as his own. She is a family household name. So she comes to mind. Growing up, Candace Parker was big for me. She played for the Lady Vols in Tennessee, played for one of the greatest coaches of all time, Pat Summitt, who recently passed, within the decade. And I looked up to her, and she's still out there playing, and she's maybe about 4 or 5 years older than me. And the expiration date on female athletes is smaller, right? Especially if you want to have a family, if you want to have other things in life, whereas male athletes don't have to worry about that as much. You've got the Lisa Leslies who chose to take a break to have a family. Oh my gosh, well, Cheryl Swoops. I mean, I'm blanking on all the names, but they're out there that I've played against. Brittany Griner. I mean, she's down there, and she was down there in Baylor. Opportunity to play against her. The Gumike sisters, they are from Houston, and I got the opportunity to play against them. And so there's a number of female athletes, and unless you are tuned into it, you won't know.
Yeah, exactly. So how many years did you play, by the way?
All my life. So I got the privilege of going straight from high school into college, played for Ford University, loved my time there at Indiana University. I'm a proud Hoosier in Bloomington. And then took about a semester off before going overseas. And I played in Germany for a while before returning home and kind of deciding, all right, what's next? And that brings me to kind of like the part of my life where I had to decide, I had to realize I'm so much more than this sport because I'm ready.
Right.
My joints are tired. I'm tired. Physically, can I keep this up? Financially, can I keep this up? Right. Because although I
Right.
was
Yeah.
there playing, I only had enough to pay, what was rent or survive off of the groceries I had. It's not a fair game. So a lot of female athletes have to make that choice of like, okay, what else am I? And what else
Right.
am I good at? And how do I transition?
Right. Right. So
Mhm.
Renee, do you have a question?
Yeah, did you notice, because we're talking about stereotypes, did you notice stereotypes being different while you were in Germany? People treating you differently than they treat you here?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. I did recognize in the small town that I was in, I was one of what saw few African Americans, um, brown skinned, right? Because there
Right,
are,
yeah.
People of color.
there are people of color, yes,
Yeah.
that do live in Germany that do partake in sports and just live there because that's where they grew up. But
Right.
I mean, I was hired, right? Because that was a job. I was hired to perform at a particular level, and there is a difference between an African American or a person of color and the performance of those that aren't. And so there's a different style as well. So I was hired for a particular type of basketball, which is interesting. So I mean, just my signing contract was a stereotype, if you will. Uh, there was something that I brought to the table that wasn't for various reasons. So
Yeah. Well, what's different about
Mhm.
German basketball as opposed to American basketball? I mean, that's an interesting.
It's
I never thought
intense.
about that.
It is. There is a difference. I will say so. Indiana, Big Ten, big schools, right? You have Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan, uh, Illinois. Naturally, individuals born in the Northwest are developed differently than they are in the South. And when I got to Germany, it was as if I was playing against a team full of 6'5" women who had shoulders out to here, right? And just owning it. I mean, they're in their own skin, they're confident, they're proud. And I stand all of 6'3" and I felt small, So yeah, it's a different if European basketball is vastly different than it is here in America.
Right.
So you noticed that there was a different attitude towards those women as opposed to what you feel here in America.
Yes, for sure. For sure. I have a question for you, Renee, when it came to tennis, right? The women that you played against, was there a particular like mindset that stood some of the girls out from the others? For example, for me, right, as a African American athlete, it was expected that I had to be tough and I had to be I had to speak a certain way and I had to be aggressive.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I wasn't like I present myself as a girly girl. I, hate when I chip a nail. Like I do have soft spots. And I think when I even played against other Black girls, like that was frowned upon and I was made fun of because of those things. So I was wondering in the life of tennis, did that exist as well for you?
Well, in tennis, they've sexualized it with the skirt, with even the skirts, and you notice a lot of men will come to watch female tennis, literally just to, and it's the same thing in volleyball. I also played
Yeah, same.
volleyball for like a little while. Yeah. So I don't know if basketball, and certainly equestrians, we were not sexualized in equestrian because everything is just covered, or at least I didn't feel that way. But in tennis, so there is more of a girly girl slant to things where it's like okay to be a little bit more soft. I feel like some of that is there, but grit and determination, yeah, for any athletics, I mean, for any sport you're going to play, I think, like, for example, we would, let me know if this resonates with you. We would, in the locker room, we would sort of brag about how hurt we were and that we were still going to go on and perform.
Wow.
So it's like, oh, I busted this up last time, or like you just mentioned it, and it's almost like it's a red badge of courage, and it's kind of cool almost to trash your body. It's almost cool, like it shows your tenacity, I think, and it's almost like you're not supposed to. And I remember it's actually Simone Biles. She came out and there was a big thing. I don't know if you guys remember this with the Olympics, but she bowed out
Yes.
because she thought and there was like a lot of flack that she took where people were saying, I can't believe you gave up. And she was like, look, like my health, my mental health, my emotional health, my physical safety has got to come first. When she did that, I had a tough week because I and a lot of my friends that I grew up with and colleagues that I had when I used to play sports competitively, we would call each other and we were like, for the first day, because of our generation, it might be different than your generation, we kind of judged her. We did. We were like, oh, okay, you're hurting. Like that was the feeling. And then like I had to sit down because I don't know much. I did gymnastics when I was like a child, so I don't really know gymnastics, And then I had people explaining to me, no, she literally could have broken her neck. She could have been paralyzed. She literally could have. And then I was like, oh, okay. But those initial headlines, a lot of older athletes were like, where's the grit? Where's the tenacity? Come on, come on, Simone. Come on, Simone. And it was a good 48 hours, 24 hours where I was like, okay, wait a minute. I got educated that it is not worth dying for. And in fact, now I look back at that and I always tell younger people, I say, look at what she did. She was a hero because she didn't compete. She didn't push herself to that limit.
Right.
But that was a big flip in the culture. I feel like that's a huge flip in the culture. And the younger generations hopefully will not have to deal with it at the same level.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That was one of my hopeful talking points is to what your question was, Manny, of like, how do we break it down? How do we separate ourselves from these stereotypes?
Right.
But before I do, I wanted to ask Manny as well. You're not, like you said, you're not a sports guy. That hasn't been in your realm, but just as a human being, right?
Mhm.
What are some of the stereotypes you've experienced that have led you to be available to have this conversation? Because I think, Renee, what you did beautifully was expose a moment of vulnerability of like, that was a real life bias I had due to my life experience in sport. I saw that as a weakness.
Yep.
But I think that's how we get rid of it. Is
Be honest.
exposing it.
Yes. Expose and be honest.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good question, Simone. And hardly anybody ever asks me that, so thank you. Well, one of the things is, I'm a handicapped person. I've mentioned this before. I'm an amputee, and I got around on prosthetics, with sort of artificial legs, and I do okay, but there are certain stereotypes of people who are handicapped that sometimes people question your intelligence. If you're not physically able, or even if they don't, there's still that almost sort of feeling of both, in a weird way, both pity and almost resentment. Like if I park in a handicapped parking spot, I mean, that's what it's there for. It's for someone like me to use. But I almost feel like sometimes people think, oh, well, you've got it easy. You get to park in the good spot, right in front of wherever. It's like, yeah, but honestly, I'd rather be able to park, a mile down the way and still be able to walk to wherever, on my own legs. But that's not the reality. I have to face the reality that's not me. That I have to use that parking spot because A, that's what it's for, and B, it's just it's easier for me to get around. It's for my convenience as well, and so that's one thing that I've faced. As far as not ethically, but ethnically, being Hispanic, yeah, I've faced a little bit of prejudice in that regard. People think, oh, well, he's Mexican, whatever. Especially going to school, thinking, oh, well, he's has these things handed to him, scholarship. I never went on a scholarship. I had grants, so I didn't want to have loans. So I try to get every grant that I could possibly apply for, and I usually got them. And I know some people are like, "Oh, well, of course you got the grant. I mean, you're a minority, so of course."
Mm-hmm.
So that's that idea of some people have this idea of labeling it as reverse discrimination, and rather than which. And now, of course, we have the situation where the Supreme Court has struck down affirmative action.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I kind of want to get your take on that, Simone. How do you feel about that as uh, just as a person?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that? Do you think that was a good idea, a bad idea? How do you feel about that? About them knocking down affirmative action?
Yeah. Forgive me. I'm not too versed in that recent right vote or decision. Um, but to add on to what you're saying and to possibly touch on it, so definitely correct me where it doesn't fit. I believe everybody wants to feel special, and they want to feel special in terms of not being taken away. Don't take something away from me. In order for you to be special, I want to remain special just with what I have, and I want to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when unfortunately, when things threaten the patriarchy or when they threaten a narrative that has been built uh, on what America stands on, um, it challenges those who benefit from that narrative, right? I mean, think about the right to vote. It benefited everyone who it applied to, which was a white man. And then when it was time to make that adjustment, that fight was so aggressive because it changed them. It took away something that made that feel special to
Mm-hmm.
them. So if you want, I mean, definitely go into more detail about it. But I feel like sometimes we get lost in what makes us as individuals feel special and forgetting that we can all, like, there's room for all of us, right?
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
And just because you use a handicap sticker doesn't make it, doesn't make me any more special. I'm glad that you have that access. I would prefer that, because that's what makes it accessible to you. Um, I have I've been blessed, right? I have 2 legs. Let me use them, you
Right,
know?
right. Yeah.
And so I probably didn't answer your question, but that's what came up to me as I
Yeah.
listened to you
Oh
chat about
no,
that.
that's fine.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
I want to add something to that. You're absolutely right. Everyone wants to feel special,
Mhm.
and everyone should have the same opportunity. The problem is that, and one of the reasons that affirmative action became a thing anyway was to address institutional racism, was to address the fact that African Americans were not being allowed into colleges that were predominantly white. I mean, there are historically black colleges as well. Again, because of racism, because of this idea of separate but equal and that sort of thing. And so affirmative action was a way of addressing that.
Mhm.
Well, now people are saying, well, we don't need that anymore. Everyone should have the equal chance.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's not often the case. Um, and speaking of myself as a handicapped person, there was a law that was passed called the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act,
Mhm.
which basically said buildings have to be designed now to accommodate handicapped people where they weren't before. You have to have ramps, you have to have adequate parking, and so on and so forth. And again, it was to address a was really kind of discriminatory. Um, Although it's kind of been watered down a little bit, it's not really enforced as much as it should be. But again, if
Mhm.
if African Americans
Mhm.
had been allowed to participate in society like everybody else, we wouldn't have needed uh, affirmative action. If
Conviction.
if handicapped people had been
Mhm.
accepted and treated, with the respect that they're due, or that we're due, I should say, we wouldn't have needed to pass these laws. And that's, I think, what people forget is the
Mm-hmm.
reason we pass laws like this
Mm-hmm.
is to address certain injustices, is to accommodate everyone rather than just a,
Mm-hmm.
people think that the law, oh well, that we're sort of making one group special as opposed to another group, and that's not true. That's not what it's for. So yeah, I do have a problem with them
Mm-hmm.
getting getting rid of affirmative action.
Well,
Do we
this,
need it? I don't know,
well, yeah,
but I'd
for
rather it was there than not. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
yeah.
Renee. Go ahead.
Yeah,
You were
well,
coming in.
no, just what you were saying. I just wanted to bounce off of that. Initially, what was overturned was like in the 70s, the Supreme Court said the exact opposite of what they said this year. Back in the 70s, they used it like they used an athlete's sort of circumstance to explain it. They said, what if you had a foot race and one person had a bag of potatoes that he had to carry? It's not, how do you make it fair when one person is carrying such a heavy burden and everyone else on the track is not? And so it's not, so affirmative action was to try and equal it by saying, okay, you're going to get extra time or whatever, because we're trying to accommodate the fact that we put these potatoes on your back as you're running or whatever. So it was about trying to get there to fairness. And so then this year, the Supreme Court overturns that and says, no, we're not going to accommodate any of that. Everyone is sort of just starting off whether or
Where they
not they
are.
have, wherever they are. And if we have enacted laws that have held you back, you're just going to have to deal with it personally. The government's not going to try and right those wrongs.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's usually, they throw it back to the states. And the states aren't always very accommodating. I mean, some are, but some aren't. As we know, Florida. Uh, not to get political here, but yeah.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I want to
Um,
know from Simone. I'd like to know from Simone, because when I'm speaking to younger people, particularly, I'm finding out that, and also just where you are geographically matters for how race even played a part in your life. So maybe we should ask you specifically, because I think it might be a very different answer with somebody who grew up somewhere else, or someone from a different generation, or a man.
Mm-hmm.
How has race played into your life, your identity, and any possible stereotyping that might be done against you? What is your sense here?
Yeah. Um, and this is part of why Manny and I talked through why talking about stereotypes would be more of an angle, is
Mm-hmm.
because I've always known I was Black.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew. So with that, what I'm saying is I've always known I was different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I grew up middle class in white suburbia here in Texas. And I grew up in a time where the city that I currently am in hadn't quite developed. So I basically, I feel like I've grown up with the city, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so not very much, not a lot of variety. There might have been like one or two. I know I was three of Black children in my elementary school. Um, at one point, was the only one in my grade until more families that were able to move in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up knowing that I was different. Um, Now, how my parents raised me, however, right, regardless of what race I was to be polite, to be respectful,
Mm-hmm.
to use my words, right, to act appropriately in public, um, to say yes, thank you, no, ma'am, yes,
Mm-hmm.
sir, those kind of things. And
Right.
so I think knowing who I was in the space of a large area of white people, but then
Mm-hmm.
also having that foundation of just peopling, how my
Right.
parents
Yeah.
raised me,
Mm-hmm.
has helped me to be who I am. And so again, when individuals approached me or got to know me, they were like really surprised, because what they thought of a Black person or a Black child was what they saw on TV or what they heard other people
Mm-hmm.
talking about from other areas of the United States. And then when they come to meet me, they're like, "Oh, so you must be the exception. You must be XYZ." And it's like, I'm just Simone. This is just who I
Yeah.
am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
And then not to take even height into it, I stand all of 6'3", and I have since I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that assumption, oh, you must play basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's like, gosh, I'm so much more. I like art. I like science.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good at drawing, like, how about you ask me what I like before you make that assumption if that's what I do?
Thank you. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
let's talk about that.
Okay.
Since you brought it up,
Manny's an
uh,
artist. Manny's an
I'm an
artist.
artist. I draw. I'm working on
Mhm.
comic books and all sorts of other
Mhm.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what's your preferred medium?
Mhm.
How do you express your art?
Ugh. Manny, of course you asked me that, and I haven't picked up a thing in a minute. I enjoy pen and pencil. I mean,
Oh,
pencil and paper. Just
okay.
kind of drawing and sketching it out. I can take kind of an image, whether a digital image or just like a still, like kind of just looking at my patio,
Hmm.
and draw it almost verbatim of what I see.
Oh,
I'm not really good at like thinking and imagining, but if I can have an idea, like if I want to draw a dragon on a mountain, I can go to Google dragon, draw it, and then kind of have the dynamics of it, and then kind of create from there.
oh,
Um,
okay.
but I mean, drawing, painting, I work with children, so I do a lot of artistic projects. I like to create things, tear them down, create them
Hmm.
again. I was a Lego
Awesome.
kid growing up. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my preferred medium. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. You said you hadn't done it in a while, though.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Is it?
go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. Is it because you just don't have time,
Mhm.
or
Well, it's
why?
interesting. So when we talk about a stereotype, you mentioned the stereotype for blondes and the stereotype for athletes. Over time, you start to hear the thing over and over again. You start to believe that that is the truth. And
Yeah.
I want to tap into the mental health and the dangers of a stereotype, right? So
Yes,
to answer
please.
the question, though, however, it's you get caught up in being a working class woman. You get caught up in trying to survive and trying to beat the status quo and trying to be the best. You get wrapped up. For me, I've been wrapped up in my career and who I want to
Hmm.
be, who I want to strive for. And unfortunately, I find myself in moments losing my creative spirit, losing my artistic spirit, and I
Yeah.
don't go to those because I'm so heavily focused on trying to be the best or trying to get to a particular goal because I've got potatoes on my back. And I want the same things everybody else wants, but I have to work 10 times harder. So I
Yeah.
lose a sense of that. Um, but I think that's some of the dangers of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Uh, if I can, I should kind of expose some of my work. I'm a mental health therapist.
Okay.
I've been working in the mental health space for about 8 years total, and that is in varieties of what I've been doing. I work with children of autism. I've worked with families. I've worked in foster care systems, working with young mothers, as young as 12, 13, 14. I've worked in a background of substance abuse and misuse. And so it's interesting having conversations now with individuals who struggle with who am I when I've been told all my life that I'm no good, I'm a piece of crap, I'm not worthy of saving, that my addiction is who I am and will always be, um, that they're not good enough.
Hmm.
And I think the dangers of what a stereotype can do is that it can possess somebody's identity. And again, if I've been told that I'm an angry Black woman enough, I will become an angry Black woman.
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. It's that
Um,
self-fulfilling prophecy thing of,
there we go.
yeah, yeah,
There we
yeah.
go.
Well,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that because, well, first of all, I wanted to ask you what you did for a
Mm,
living.
okay.
So you
Good.
answered that question. But following up on that,
Mm,
would you ever consider,
mm,
since you say that you're artistic,
mhm,
using art? Because I know people do that, using art as
mhm.
part of your therapy, or do you do that already?
Oh my gosh, that is a dream. So yes, I use it for what I have access for right now. Crayons, color pencils, big pieces of paper, paint. Sand tray therapy is also a
Oh,
modality where we're in the
yes,
sand and oh my gosh, we get into it. And
yes.
what I love about it, it's not just for kids. My adults
Mhm.
love. Can we get the sand tray today? I'm
I
like,
love playing with
absolutely.
sand. I love it.
Yes,
It's so calming. It's just so
yes.
calming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's part
I
of that
do.
Eastern tradition as well.
Yep.
Yes,
It
I
is.
do tap into it, and a goal of mine, right? Because I'm an analogy person. I like a visual. And so what I
Right.
would love to do is to have an iPad or some kind of sort of drawing pad and to be able to project what the client is saying via art and kind of say, hey, is this what you see? And
Mm.
sometimes I've tried it. They're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I see. Thank you for showing it to me in an artistic way. So I haven't quite yet, Mr. Manny, but I'm tapping into it in other ways. So yes, I do use art in therapy.
Oh,
Mhm.
well, good, good.
That's
Renee, do you have
beautiful.
another question?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, first of all, that's so cool. I love how you're spending your life. I love how you're giving back. I love how you're reaching out. I think one of the reasons why people do, I think stereotypes are fostered in an environment where people are closed minded and myopic and they're not really meeting a lot of different types of people.
Yes.
So if you're not meeting a lot of different types of people, you're just believing whatever stereotype somebody gave to you, even though it's
Wow.
totally inaccurate, you know? And then the self-fulfilling prophecy thing is really true. So I worked for 14 years with death row prisoners. Okay, that was like something I started when I was very young. And I'll tell you, you could have all the same demographics. Like these men might have all the same ethnic backgrounds or economic backgrounds or even geographic background, but they're totally different. You know, and you can speak to that with your clients or your patients as well. It's like there's no way. I mean, you can even meet identical twins and they will be absolutely different. So stereotypes are not telling us anything that we can actually use. All that they're doing is distracting us from the truth and actually meeting those actual people. I think the only way that stereotypes have any power is whatever we give them, or like you said, it's like when somebody tells you over and over again, this is what you are, the danger is that you might become that. But stereotypes basically blow up in our faces if we want to actually get to any sort of information about somebody. I've never noticed anyone from any group being similar to anyone else from that same group. You know, if you meet two Amish people, they're totally different. If you meet two German people, they're totally different. You meet two different Americans. Like there's three Americans on this screen, but we're all unique. But if you are someone in Russia right now, you're going to say, oh, you're all Americans. You all are this way. So it doesn't really take us any farther down the line, you know. But I love how you're spending your time with people who really do need a leg up. That was something that was very important to me in my life. And I want you to speak to this, Simone, if this has been your experience. One thing I noticed very early on working with someone who's about to be executed because they did a violent crime, whether or not they're innocent of that crime. And most of the time, 90% of the time, they were in and out of foster care. They came from poverty. They usually had a really bad home life. They were usually abused. There's usually drugs somewhere in the mix there, right? So those types of people, I never met one of them that I didn't learn something from or that didn't teach me something about life. I never met one of them that I felt was somehow inferior to me or less intelligent than I was. In fact, I was always the one sort of trying to learn from them and be educated by their experiences. You spending that much time with people who have had addiction or different things going on in their lives, has that been your experience as well, where you've noticed, oh my gosh, like I'm the one learning from this experience?
1,000%. And my relationship, my rapport with an individual that I step into any room with, the more I'm curious, the better the dynamic, the more I feel like I can help. I have a room full of books and I have a blanket full of knowledge of what it means to be a therapist and to operate therapeutically with somebody. But there is no amount of training or no amount of book reading that I can learn about a person, named Manny, that I can learn about a person named Renee, right? That is that person's job to teach me. What I do is to take that information and now give them the skills and the tools to now manipulate their life in the way that they want to live. Right. I like to let people know you are not your condition. You are not your circumstances right now. This is a part of your story. It is not your full story. You have so much more to live. And you've already done the hard part by stepping in this room and choosing to talk about it. So 100%. I learn more than I'm teaching.
Exactly.
And I think that helps me in that space. That's why people come back.
Exactly. And that helped me very early on too, because I started out when I was very young trying to work against the death penalty and stuff like that. And it turned into like a nonprofit. But I learned very early on that if I wanted to be arrogant about something or think I was better than anyone, I had better check myself almost immediately because it just wasn't true. I was finding out it wasn't true, and I'm not saying that to be like politically correct or anything. It just literally wasn't true. I was never meeting someone, even if I was meeting someone who was like homeless, literally, or someone who had great mental illness. There was never a chance of me exiting that room saying, oh, I'm so much better than this person, because that person probably had opened and expanded my mind or made me see something in myself that I had never seen before because they have a different perspective. Whenever you're having, I think we need to have more conversations. So Simone, you're doing it every day because of your career, but most people are not having continual conversations with people who are different than they are. And I think that's how you get to these stereotypes, because you're seeing people in these echo chambers, and the internet has really fostered some of that because you can block someone immediately. They say something you don't like, you block them, or you can just go to little chat rooms or wherever where everyone agrees with you. It's all the same people. It's this echo chamber. And then we're not really expanding, and we sort of just double down in whatever and then we become a stereotype because now we're being that one. Like if I were to just be around like other white women of my age or whatever, and then I'm just sitting there talking about white middle-aged women, American stuff, like it gets really boring, and you're not really, I can imagine myself getting into that stereotype place. But the thing is like I noticed very early on, you can never tell anything about anybody from a stereotype. I can't tell anything about anybody. If somebody tells me they're Greek, that to me, I have to talk to you for a really long time. I have to trust you or not trust you. I have to get in a fight with you. I have to work with you before I can have any sort of understanding. And then both of you guys know how many people have you known for sometimes years or maybe a decade, and then they surprise you and they do something you never thought they were going to do, good or bad. And you're like, wow, I thought I knew you and I didn't know you. So then how on earth could we know anything about someone standing with us at a bus stop just by how tall they are, what gender they are, And that's one thing, because we're coming up on the hour here. But Simone, I really did want to talk to you a little bit about being a woman. You talked a little bit about being like soft. You have these soft areas, and then in athletics, that's sort of seen one way. But what's your experience of being a woman? My thing that I'm noticing is I'm kind of, like I said, if I make myself look cute or whatever, then there's one kind of negativity that comes with that. And then if you're unkempt or whatever, then people have other, you can't, it's almost like no matter what you do, you're sort of, have you noticed that? I mean, I don't,
Yes.
Does your generation know a way around it? Because my generation is still waiting for somebody to unlock this mystery.
Yes.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
Yes and yes. First question for you. So I'm going to answer the question with a question. Have you seen the Barbie movie?
No, but I want to see it on Friday.
Okay. So let's revisit this.
Okay.
And it could be a one-on-one call. We can just call each other.
Okay. Okay.
But there's a moment in the movie that I think helps to expand upon your question.
Okay. See,
America
other women
Forever.
are talking about this.
Yes. America Ferrera had like a 30-second
her.
monologue, and I could not have said it more clearly or articulately that she did. So to answer your question, yes.
Watch Barbie.
That's it. Watch Barbie first and foremost. And then second, I've learned to lean into my awkwardness and just the things that make me uncomfortable, that I've either learned that make other people uncomfortable or that just naturally like feel icky to me. And I think that's how we do it, Renee. I think owning our cellulite, owning our roles, owning our imperfections as mothers, owning our imperfections as spouses, going out of the house with a bonnet.
Yep.
Because I have to go to the mail. I'm not going to go put on something extra just to please you. This is comfortable for me.
Yes.
Showing up unpampered, because who is pampered all the time, 24/7, man or woman, person, human or human.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
So I think when we start to just learn to be comfortable what has been taught to us is uncomfortable,
right,
we can change that narrative.
And embracing the imperfections. You're right. I just had a breakthrough like just a few years ago. Honestly, most of my life, I never wanted to show any imperfection, any weakness, any of that. And then I noticed then I just got too tired to do it anymore. I was like, screw it. Like, who cares? And then I noticed that the feedback from people was like, people I don't know if it's like a likability went up, but it was like people kind of like a little bit of some rough edges. So I would tell that to women too, to you're trying to, or men, you're trying to be perfect. You're trying to get everything right. And it's like, no, you can actually form better relationships, deeper relationships, and actually be liked and respected and honored for being who you actually are authentically.
I have made a conscious choice to show up that way every day for sessions. I used to not wear my natural hair. Of course, it's pinned up and pulled back, so I'm not wearing it as big and as voluminous as it can be, that I do most days. I had to grow into that because there was shame built around my natural hair and the way it was shaped and the way it felt by people who didn't have it growing out of their head. My hair sometimes, if I choose, can stand straight up. And sometimes I wake up and I'm like, that's what you want to do today? Okay, let's do it. I'll put on a cute lipstick. I'll put on an outfit or dress and I'll own it. And I think people approach me differently when they're like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what to say, but I love everything.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. The mistake is what is, people value the mistake.
Yep.
They like the mistake. Even like in music and stuff, if you go to like a live concert, there'll be like a mistake and you're like, wow, that was like a really cool part,
Because that resonates with something in them that they're hiding or that they're afraid to come out with.
Right.
We can be a different type of mirror to each other if we just choose to be vulnerable, and we can allow people to just be themselves by allowing ourselves to be ourselves.
Oh, Manny, wasn't that perfect? Manny, wasn't that like the perfect? Like we should have just rolled the credits right there because that was like perfect.
I just want to say I didn't want to interrupt because this is a wonderful conversation.
It was a little bit of a girl takeover. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Less for me to do.
Sorry.
But I want to say this. As a man working in a professional environment, as I did when I was a graphic designer for the newspaper, there were certain expectations of, the first day that I showed up for work, someone, my supervisor pulled me aside. So I came in and, I just had just a regular shirt, no tie, nothing, pulled me aside and said, men here we're expected to wear ties, and slacks, and all that. Because I was in blue jeans and, and a shirt probably like this. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, so I was pretty much fresh out of college. So I bought some ties, put them on, and, went to work and everything was fine. But after a while, they started to sort of ease up on those restrictions. Now, the salespeople, the sales guys and the sales ladies, they were still expected to dress, professionally, suits, ties, dresses, whatever. The women, and again, there's that generational difference. Because I'm older than both of you. I'm older than dirt, as a matter of fact. But at that time, and this was not that long ago. This was the mid '80s. Women were still expected to wear a skirt to work, to wear a dress to work.
Yeah.
It wasn't until again, restrictions started easing up. They were allowed to wear pants. They were they didn't have to wear stockings. They didn't, high heels.
Thank God.
Still a bit of a requirement. But even that
high heels are very uncomfortable.
Yeah, but even that started to go away a little bit. But you were still expected to dress nice, as a professional environment. But us, we were the renegades, the creative department, as we eventually were called. All us artist types. We started to kind of rebel, and there were some of the ladies that I worked with in that department. They wore T-shirts and shorts to work. They were flip-flops. I still wore my, not dressy shirt, but I wore these. But I started to wear jeans more and more, ditched the tie, and nobody said anything. It started with casual Friday, but after a while, that just became. But that's just the way it, sort of generational. I noticed that the older men were always formal. They were always the ties, the suits. The younger guys were a little bit more casual about their dress. They still wore the ties and stuff, but they weren't quite as tied, so to speak, to that, And this, oh, I never would have had this, you know, length of beard when I was working. I had, you know, I generally had a goatee, had my hair short. Now it's a lot longer, as you can see. I've turned into the hippie that I wanted to be. That,
You've
uh,
got all in. I love it.
I've gone
Yes.
all in, but most of that happened after I left that environment, and suddenly I gave myself permission
There we
to
go.
say, you know what, I don't have to keep my hair short anymore. I don't have to keep
Hmm.
the beard trimmed anymore.
Mm-mm.
You know, I can be myself finally, and so that's what I did. So I think that a lot has a lot to do with it too. Is there's still this idea that if you're in a professional environment, that you have to dress a certain way. It's a uniform that we
Hmm.
put on.
Yes.
But I think, you know, and Simone, you could probably speak to this. In the environment that you're in the profession that you're in, do
Mm-hmm.
you feel that need? Do you feel like, oh, I have to dress a certain way to come to work to be taken seriously, or do
Mm-hmm.
you feel like, no, I can dress however I want, and I can still do my job?
Mm-hmm. I would say in my infancy, right? When I first started out, internships, they teach you all that in school.
Hmm.
Um, but I quickly learned that I want to show up how clients are showing up, which is very casual and in their comfy clothes, because that makes me feel good. If I wore, and I wear blazers sometimes, but if I wore a full suit, I don't want to present myself as better than just by the way I look. I want to come
Right.
in as equal on the ground level. So I've, like yourself, have grown out of that. Today I wore jeans and had my shoulders out, so the guns were out, and
Hmm.
clients I think can feel comfortable with that because, oh,
Yeah.
she's comfortable, she's okay in her skin. Maybe I can do that too.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I know Renee. She always presents herself in a certain
Depends on what
way.
I'm doing. Yeah, if I'm acting, I have to wear a costume or whatever. But yeah, in law school, they taught us that in law school. I mean, you cannot, lawyers cannot not wear a suit. Lawyers cannot wear. I mean, there's no client that would trust a lawyer, at least till today. I mean, um, yeah.
There's a billboard. His name is Zombie. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. He's been around since I've lived in Austin. And he's a lawyer, and it presents to be a white man with
Hmm.
dreadlocks. And I remember we had a conference here in the city in my master's degree, and one of my classmates was like, "Oh my gosh, he's a lawyer. Why would he look like that?" And I said to her, I said, because that's what Austin looks like.
Yeah, Austin is weird.
You
Keep
know?
Austin weird. Yeah,
Keep
Hawaii
Austin
is like that
weird.
too. In Hawaii, they can wear the Hawaiian shirt. So it does depend. You're right.
Yeah.
Sure,
So
but here he is, professional,
Hmm.
dressing as his clientele because that makes him feel comfortable, and that's
Right.
what works for the situation and the
Well,
clientele he's working
exactly. Like for example, Silicon Valley did the hoodie. Like when you
with.
go to
Okay.
in Silicon Valley, like if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, he has a hoodie. It's probably a very expensive hoodie, but he did. And then in Hollywood, so like engineers now have like their own little bro outfit, which is usually some kind of a hoodie with like Google on it or Apple or whatever. But then like
Okay.
Hollywood directors always dress really, the jeans, the hat, the t-shirt. So you're
Hmm.
right. So sometimes, but sometimes like dressing up is dressing down. It just depends on your environment. I know what you mean about Austin because yeah,
Hmm.
you want to be casual and that gets you respect, whereas like New York City, that would be a no-no, right? But I think it's also just knowing your environment and knowing what people, what's okay for
right.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Exactly. It's almost a cultural thing as well. Um,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah,
it's interesting that you
absolutely.
brought up the fact that this was a white man with dreadlocks,
That's my
basically.
assumption, right? Because it's on a billboard.
We think he.
I'm
That's
not
what he
sure.
looks like.
It's fine,
Yes.
but I mean that also brings up the idea of
Mhm.
we hear this term cultural
Cultural
appropriation.
appropriation.
You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
is that okay?
Hmm.
And my thing is, yeah, why shouldn't a white person wear dreadlocks
Hmm.
if that's what I mean? I've known like, there was a hairdresser here in town, and that's all I ever knew him. He's a white guy. In fact, he talk about stereotypes. He's gay, but he always had dreadlocks, and but they looked good on him, and it was part of his persona. So I thought, yeah, I didn't think anything of that. But then I tend to be a little more, like loosey goosey about people anyway, so to speak. But that was who he was, and I know other people. I live in a very conservative town, and I'm sure some of his clientele probably talked about him behind his back, like used to see him with the hair, and and he's gay and all that. But so what? They still went to him because they knew he was good. They knew
That's right.
he knew his stuff, and I think that's sometimes what you have to do is to overcome those stereotypes. To overcome is just be good at what you do, whether it's therapy, whether it's broadcasting, whether it's whatever. There's that saying, nothing succeeds like success. And I think that's part of it too, is that idea of you being taken seriously, regardless of who you are, is if you're good at what you do. I mean, it still doesn't make up for, people judging you because of stereotypes and so forth. But it's a step forward. And so
Do we have time for one more question?
sure.
Or are we
think so.
out? I'm sorry.
Let's do one more
Renee?
question. Let's do
Okay,
it.
so
go ahead.
speaking of those who created the stereotype, right? Sometimes I like
Mhm.
to think about like, okay, so how do we get here? Do you think it is created for those who are uncomfortable without boxes? I need a box to know where I fit, and I need a box to know where you fit, because
Right.
that's how I separate myself from you.
Mm-hmm.
Stereotypes
Yes.
exist because of somebody else's uncomfortability with, okay. So we're all in agreement that like that's
That's what I think. Well,
yeah.
that's what my guess would be, because I bet we can figure it out right now. Because let's all think of something that we've had a stereotype. I told you about Simone Biles, and I found out that I had a stereotype against athletes who don't apparently want to kill themselves, and I had to work through that. I mean, that was a crazy stereotype that I had, and I had to work through that. Absolutely, I have a stereotype against women. I mean, against men. So Simone is a woman. If I'm in a parking garage and and there's a man there, I mean, I'd much prefer to see a woman in a parking garage with me than a stranger who's a man. Just me personally. I feel unsettled if I'm in a place or an alleyway. If I'm in an alleyway and there's a strange man coming, I'd much prefer to see a strange woman. So I do have some biases against men. So that is uncomfortability, though, when I'm saying these things. So I think that you do have a point, because when I run it through the filter of my own stereotypes, I can see that it's from me being insecure and wanting to have those categories. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Can I relate to this person? Can I not relate to this person? I would feel very uncomfortable talking about menstrual cycles with Manny, but even though I've known him longer than I know you. But Simone, we could meet each other immediately and probably be like, oh my gosh,
Yep.
I'm cramping right now or whatever.
Yep.
I've had that conversation with women on a bus. You can. So so I don't know, Manny. What do you think?
Well, it's funny.
Sorry, you got a little
no.
weird with them.
No. It's interesting because I worked toward the end of my employment. All the rest of the creatives were women. And believe you me, and I was the only guy in this little office that we were finally in. And believe me, I heard everything from menstruation, everything from birth to death. They discussed openly and in front of me, and I was like, okay, And did it make me feel uncomfortable? A little bit, because these were intimate details that they were discussing about themselves. But they made me realize that that's something that happens. When like-minded people get together, they're going to talk about things that they have in common, right?
Yeah,
whether it's
sure.
women, whether it's white people in general, whether it's black people in general, whether it's Hispanic people in general. We're going to talk about the things that we know about. And to Simone's point earlier about putting things in boxes, absolutely, that's absolutely the case. And that's and unfortunately, or I don't know if it's unfortunate, but that's part of human nature. We seem to have the need to categorize things, to put things in neat little boxes, to be able to say, okay, to stick a label on it and say, okay, this is a man, this is a woman, this is a child, this is a black person, this is a white person, this is a man. I think I repeated myself. This is a blonde, this is a brunette, and so on and so forth, to kind of make it easy for ourselves rather than do the heavy lifting of having actually to know this person, if we meet someone as a stranger. So yeah, so absolutely.
So then, in order to discombobulate what a stereotype is, we must be uncomfortable outside the lines.
Exactly.
And that is a commercial for Outside the Lines. Mic drop. Thank you, Simone, because now we have a commercial for it. We can actually do that.
There's the TikTok.
Let's do it.
Hi, TikTok.
Thank you. Thank you, Simone.
I love it.
Beautiful, Simone. Beautifully stated. Thank you.
And I think with that, I don't think there's anything more.
That's the mic drop. That's the mic drop.
Unless anybody has anything else to say.
No, this is awesome.
No, this was awesome. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Manny. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. You were wonderful. I knew you were going to be great on the show. And
come back sometimes. Come back sometimes.
Yes, we'd love to have you back. And we'll just chit chat just among us girls.
No, you're not in the girls' club yet.
Not implying anything.
Are you coming out with a statement, Manny, about your identity that we should?
I identify as a cartoon character.
Okay,
there we go.
There you go. Okay, well, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone. 9:00 tonight we have Tom Cheshire's show, which is Burn It Down. That's going to be a live show from Puerto Rico. I can never say that properly, but he's in Puerto Rico. All of my Hispanic friends will correct me. He will be there live. We're going to have a positive party. We're going to talk about mental health and being positive and all kinds of great stuff and music and art. So everybody tune in at 9 p.m. Eastern. And next week on Outside the Lines, we have another special guest, a personal friend of mine named Alan, who has a very interesting story to tell. And it's going to be a continuation of our discussion on religion. So please tune in for that. All right. Same bad time, same bad channel. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night, everyone.